Hello, everybody. My name is Cheryl. I am 18 years old. Have you ever heard the saying, take chances, make mistakes? That's how you grow? I strongly believe there are moments in your life when you don't have any room for mistakes. In a moment of weakness, I made the wrong choice, so I've been paying the price ever since. So there I was, a determined girl with a promising future. I had just finished school and was in my first year of college. This is when I met Brody. He was already an undergraduate, so he helped me to settle in. We became really good friends, and it didn't actually take us long to become a couple. We were so young and in love, it seemed we had the whole world at our disposal. But as it turned out, you never know. Time went on, but I started to notice some weird changes in my mood and body. I would wake up broken and exhausted in the mornings. Even if I had gotten good sleep, I'd snap at my friends for no reason. So I became tormented by some troubling doubts and told my roommate about it. She immediately recommended that I take a pregnancy test. Oh, that was the last thought I had about my condition. This is something that happens only in bad movies. This kind of thing would never happen to me in real life. But it did happen. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw those 2 lines on the test. To say that I was shocked would be an understatement. No, I have nothing against children, but I was only 17. What about my bright future? My plans? What was my mom going to say? It all seemed like the end of the world. I texted Brody in the middle of the night and asked him to meet me on campus. When I got there, he was already sitting on the bench and waiting for me. He looked really worried and asked me what had happened. It wasn't hard to say that I was pregnant. It was much harder to admit that I didn't want the baby. So I didn't say a word about my feelings. What would he think of me then? But when Brody said, "Not cool, it's not the time for that now," I felt so betrayed. That was so easy for him to say. What did he think I was supposed to do now? How could the person who loved me treat me like that? I didn't sleep a wink that night. I couldn't stop thinking it all over and finally came to an agreement with myself. That next morning, I went up to Brody and announced, "I will give birth to the baby and put it up for adoption." And then I added coldly, "But you stay away from me from now on." And he did. We didn't even talk anymore afterward. I didn't have time to mourn. My parents still had no idea what was going on. So when I went home on vacation, I was preparing myself for a tough talk. It went better than I thought it would, though. Of course, both my mom and dad were shocked and upset, but they supported my decision after all. And before I knew it, I found a couple who wanted to adopt the baby. The woman's name was Mrs. Stevenson. She was the first one who called me and said she was ready to discuss the details as soon as possible. I was so happy. We invited her to come to our place, and she showed up with her husband, a lawyer, and a bunch of documents I had to sign. She was very nice to me and offered me amazing benefits. She would pay all my expenses, and the baby would live the happiest life possible in a big house with the most loving family. I asked if the couple had any other children, and Mrs. Stevenson said that she had a grown-up son from her first marriage, so she knew everything about raising children. It all sounded great, so I signed all the documents, even though I had really mixed feelings about what I was doing. Time went on. As I was going through all these pregnancy things, my baby's potential mother would call me every day and ask how I was feeling, what I had for breakfast, and ask me to take care of myself and my health. She also accompanied me to every ultrasound. One day the doctor told us it was a boy. I was going to have a son, I thought. But then I remembered it was Mrs. Stevenson who was going to have a son, not me. I caught myself thinking about it, and it made me feel a little sad. Anyway, I went back to college and had to integrate myself into normal life. I tried to study hard and to not notice what felt like millions of eyes on my big pregnant belly. Every time I occasionally bumped into Brody, he would look down and hide his eyes. I was on my 30th week of pregnancy when I started to wake up in the middle of the night because the baby would kick me from the inside, but it didn't annoy me at all. I would talk to him or even sing, and believe it or not, he would calm down. The more I would try to avoid these thoughts, the more obvious it was. I didn't want to give my baby to that woman or to anybody else, but I knew it was impossible, so I kept on pretending everything was okay. But one day I got a message. It was Brody. He said he wanted to meet me as soon as possible. I remember my heart started beating faster, and we agreed to meet on campus. Brody was sitting on the very bench where we talked the last time, so many months ago. He was so nervous he couldn't even look me in the eye. But then he said, "I'm so sorry. Please forgive me." He apologized a million times and then asked, "Can we possibly start it all over again? Don't give the baby away. It's not right." I saw that he was almost crying. After a minute, I was already hugging Brody. I don't think I ever felt so happy. I knew that now it was all going to be perfect, and I was sure that my parents and Mrs. Stevenson would understand. Brody immediately invited me to come to his place. He was determined to introduce me to his mother and his stepfather. It turned out that Brody didn't live far from my house. I was very excited about meeting his family. We went up to the house, but when the door opened, I almost fainted. It was Mrs. Stevenson who opened the door. Brody solemnly proclaimed, "Mom, this is Cheryl. Cheryl, this is my mother." Mrs. Stevenson and I were just standing there and looking at each other. I couldn't say a word. But then she calmly said, "Well, come in then." I realized that Brody was completely unaware of what was happening. For some reason, Mrs. Stevenson kept on pretending that it was the first time she had seen me in her life. She was asking questions and serving food and tea, and I was just sitting there frozen. When she finally went to the kitchen to get something, I grabbed Brody's hand and asked him if he had ever told his mother about me and about the baby. He hesitated for a moment, but then confessed that after we had broken up, he had told his mother the whole story. And he also told her I was going to put the baby up for adoption. But then he started to calm me down and help me realize that everything would be absolutely fine. I realized I had to tell Brody the truth now. So I made myself say, "Your mother is the very woman who was going to adopt the baby." Now it was Brody's turn to freeze. When Mrs. Stevenson came back to the room and saw our faces, she smiled bitterly and said, "I see you guys have discussed it already." We both were just staring at her with our mouths wide open, being unable to say anything. She looked at Brody and exclaimed, "Did you really think I would let that stupid girl give away my grandson?" My heart sank to my stomach. Nice Mrs. Stevenson was not nice anymore. I started mumbling that I had changed my mind and realized my mistake. It could have all actually been a happy ending if Mrs. Stevenson hadn't said that she was not going to change the terms of the contract. She said Brody and I were too young and too stupid to bring up a child. And moreover, a mother who wanted to give up her own child didn't deserve to be his mother anymore. I was stunned. I realized that when I first met Mrs. Stevenson, I was so charmed by her that I hadn't even read the terms of the contract carefully. It said that if I refused to give her the baby, I would have to pay back all the money she had spent on my medical examinations. Should I have even expected such a stab in the back? My father was an accountant and my mom was a housewife. They would have to mortgage our house to return that amount of money, not to mention how much money I would need to raise the child. No matter how Brody tried to beg Mrs. Stevenson to accept me as her grandson's mother, she was adamant. She was looking at me with disgust, so I realized it was useless. I ran out of that house as quickly as I could. I got into a taxi and rode away. I was absolutely broken. I came home in tears and told everything to my mom and dad. Luckily, they were both unanimous. My mom squeezed me in her arms and said we would cope with this together, whatever it took. I think I have the best parents in the world. I hope I will become a great mother for my son, too. I called Mrs. Stevenson and stated that I terminated the contract and would give her all the money back as soon as I could. I still didn't know what Brody was thinking, but I had a bad feeling because he didn't even call me after I ran away from his house. He didn't call me the following day or even a week later. He also didn't even bother to answer me when I texted him that our son had been born. But then I got a message from my roommate. She said Brody had come back to college and was having a great time with his new girlfriend. Great. I guess I am a single mother now. Well, I realize this is all my fault, that it has led me to where I am now. I hope things will get better one day. But whatever happens next, I believe I have made at least one right decision in my life. I didn't give my son away. I hope my story will help the ones who are now in the same situation and have no idea what to do with it. You are welcome to share it with your parents and friends. Think twice. Yours, Cheryl.